What if the most beautiful day of your life was used as a weapon to destroy you? Imagine a grand ballroom filled with 100 of the city's elite, all eyes on one man, a charismatic millionaire on the verge of a life-changing announcement. But this isn't a celebration of his success. It's the stage for a shocking betrayal. He's about to propose to his mistress in front of everyone. But he's forgotten one crucial detail. His pregnant wife is in the audience, and she's holding a secret that will turn his triumphant moment into a public spectacle of ruin. Stay with us as we unravel a story of love lies and a revenge so perfectly orchestrated it will leave you breathless. The lie was a gilded car, and Julian Thorne was both its prisoner and its architect. To the world, he was the golden boy of the tech industry, the visionary CEO of Nexus Innovations, a company that had revolutionized the way people connected. His life was a curated masterpiece of success, a sprawling penthouse overlooking the city, a collection of vintage cars that would make any collector weep, and a wife who was the epitome of grace and beauty, Amelia. Amelia Thorne was more than just a pretty face on Julian's arm. She was an accomplished art curator, her gallery a sanctuary of emerging talent in a city obsessed with the established. Her intelligence was as sharp as her wit, her heart as expansive as the canvases she so adored. She was the calm to his storm, the anchor to his soaring ambition. And she was pregnant with their first child, a secret they had been cherishing, a new chapter they were about to write together in the beautiful story of their lives. Or so she thought. In the weeks leading up to the Nexus Innovations' 10th anniversary gala, Julian had been a different man. He was more attentive, more affectionate than he had been in months. He would come home early, bearing bouquets of Amelia's favorite peonies, his eyes filled with a tenderness that melted away the subtle anxieties that had begun to creep into her heart. He'd talk about the baby, his voice thick with emotion, his hand resting on her burgeoning belly, as if to protect their unborn child from the world. Amelia, ever the optimist, had allowed herself to believe that this was a new beginning, that the distance she had felt growing between them was just a product of his work stress. She had no idea that his renewed affection was nothing more than a carefully constructed facade, a final act of deception before the curtain fell on their marriage. The truth was, Julian was leading a double life, a life that revolved around Isabella Rossi. Isabella was a force of nature, a fiery Italian beauty with ambition that burned as brightly as her emerald eyes. A rising star in the world of fashion, blogging her social media, was a carefully curated fantasy of glamour and luxury, a life she was determined to make her own. She had met Julian at a tech conference a year ago, and their connection had been instant electric and utterly forbidden. To Isabella, Julian was not just a married man. He was a stepping stone, a golden ticket to the life she so desperately craved. She had convinced herself that their love was real, a passionate affair that eclipsed the staid, comfortable marriage he had with Amelia. She saw Amelia as a relic of Julian's past, a woman who couldn't possibly understand the depths of his ambition, the fire in his soul. Isabella was the future, and she was tired of waiting in the wings. The plan had been hatched in the hushed intimacy of a 5-star hotel suite, a place that had become their sanctuary. It was Isabella's idea, a bold, audacious move that would leave no room for retreat. "You need to choose Julian," she had whispered, her fingers tracing the sharp line of his jaw. "You can't have both. It's time to show the world who you really love. Propose to me at the gala, in front of everyone. Let them see that I am the one you choose." Julian, a man who had built an empire on calculated risks, was initially hesitant. The scandal would be enormous, the fallout unpredictable. But Isabella's words had tapped into a deep-seated insecurity. He harbored a fear of being ordinary. He had always been a man who took what he wanted, and he wanted Isabella. He wanted the thrill, the passion, the validation she offered. He had convinced himself that a clean break, however brutal, was the only way. He would be seen as a man of decisive action, a man who followed his heart no matter the cost. He would be free. So the stage was set for a public execution of his marriage. The Nexus Innovations 10th Anniversary Gala, to be held at the opulent Marina Bay Sands in Singapore, was the chosen venue. The guest list was a who's who of the global tech and finance industries. The media would be there in full force. It was the perfect platform for Julian to unveil his new life with Isabella by his side. A few days before the gala, Julian presented Amelia with a stunning diamond necklace. "A little something to celebrate us," he had said, his voice a smooth, practiced lie, "for being the most patient, loving wife a man could ask for, and for carrying our child." Amelia, her heart swelling with love, had thrown her arms around him, burying her face in his neck, inhaling the familiar scent of his cologne. A scent she had always associated with home, with safety. She was completely oblivious to the fact that in a velvet box, tucked away in his safe, lay another diamond. A diamond of staggering size and brilliance, a diamond that would soon be placed on another woman's finger. The legendary Winston Blue Diamond, a gem as deep and blue as the ocean of lies he was about to drown her in. Amelia had her own surprise planned for the gala. She had spent weeks secretly compiling a video montage of their life together. It was a love letter in moving pictures, their first date, their trip to Tuscany, their wedding day. The highlight was a clip from their wedding vows. Julian's voice, thick with unshed tears, promising to love and cherish her for all eternity. She had intended to have it played as a surprise for him during her toast, a public declaration of her love and excitement for their growing family. She had no idea that her beautiful, heartfelt gift would become her weapon of choice in a war she didn't even know she was fighting. As Amelia packed for their trip to Singapore, she hummed a soft tune, her hand resting on her belly. She felt a flutter, a gentle kick from the new life growing inside her. She smiled. Everything was perfect. She was living in a gilded cage, but she was yet to see the bars. The door was about to be flung open, not to freedom, but to a devastating truth that would shatter her world into a million pieces. The storm was gathering, and she was standing right in its eye, blissfully unaware of the destruction that was about to be unleashed. The grand ballroom of the Marina Bay Sands was a spectacle of breathtaking opulence. Crystal chandeliers like frozen waterfalls hung from the vaulted ceiling, casting a galaxy of light upon the sea of guests below. The air hummed with the symphony of clinking champagne flutes, hushed conversations, and the gentle strains of a string quartet. The elite of the global tech world were all there, dressed in their finest, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of success. This was Julian Thorne's kingdom, and tonight he was its undisputed king. Amelia, radiant in a bespoke midnight blue gown that draped elegantly over her pregnant form, moved through the crowd with an easy grace. The diamond necklace Julian had given her sparkled at her throat, a cold, beautiful lie against her warm skin. She greeted friends and acquaintances, her smile genuine, her heart full of a quiet joy. She felt a surge of pride for Julian, for the empire he had built from the ground up. She was his partner in every sense of the word, his confidant, his biggest supporter. Tonight was a celebration of their shared journey, their shared success. Julian was in his element, a charismatic whirlwind of handshakes and charming smiles. He moved from one influential guest to another, his words as smooth as the vintage champagne he sipped. But beneath the polished veneer of the successful CEO, a current of nervous energy crackled. His eyes would occasionally flit towards the entrance, a flicker of anticipation, of dread in their depths. Amelia, ever attuned to his moods, noticed his restlessness. "Everything all right, my love?" she asked, her hand finding his. "You seem a little on edge." Julian turned to her, his smile a masterpiece of deception. "Just the usual pre-speech jitters," he lied, squeezing her hand. 10 years. It's a big milestone. I want everything to be perfect." He leaned in and kissed her, a brief, almost perfunctory gesture that felt more like a performance for the benefit of those watching than a genuine expression of affection. "You look breathtaking tonight, Amelia," he murmured, his eyes holding hers for a fraction of a second too long. A flicker of something unreadable in their depths. It could have been guilt, or perhaps a final fleeting moment of regret. Amelia, reassured, smiled back at him. "You'll be brilliant, as always." A short while later, Isabella Rossi made her entrance. She was a vision in crimson, a stark, dramatic contrast to the cool blues and silvers that dominated the ballroom. Her dress was a daring, figure-hugging creation that announced her arrival with an unapologetic confidence. Heads turned, whispers followed in her wake. She was a woman who commanded attention, and tonight she was determined to hold it. She caught Julian's eye from across the room, a slow, predatory smile gracing her lips. It was a look of shared conspiracy, of imminent victory. Amelia, her back to the entrance, as she chatted with the wife of a Japanese investor, missed the silent exchange entirely. The moment came after the main course had been cleared. The lights dimmed, and a spotlight found Julian as he ascended the stage. A hush fell over the ballroom. He stood at the podium, the Nexus Innovations logo glowing on the massive screen behind him. He looked out at the sea of faces, a confident smile playing on his lips. He began his speech with a walk down memory lane, his voice resonant and captivating. He spoke of the early days of Nexus Innovations, the struggles, the breakthroughs, the relentless pursuit of a dream. He was a master storyteller, weaving a narrative of innovation and perseverance that had the audience hanging on his every word. He paid tribute to his team, his investors, his partners. It was a flawless performance, the speech of a visionary leader at the pinnacle of his success. Amelia watched him from her table at the front, her heart swelling with pride. She clutched the small USB drive in her purse, the wedding video she had so lovingly prepared. She couldn't wait to see the look on his face when she played it. Then Julian's tone shifted. "Success," he said, his voice taking on a more personal, more intimate quality, "is not just about building a company. It's about building a life. It's about finding that one person who understands you, who challenges you, who inspires you to be the best version of yourself." Amelia smiled, thinking he was about to pay tribute to her, to their marriage. Her hand instinctively went to her belly. "For a long time," Julian continued, his eyes scanning the crowd, "I thought I had that. I thought I knew what happiness was. But life has a funny way of surprising you. It throws you a curveball when you least expect it, and you realize that everything you thought you knew, everything you thought you wanted, was wrong." A ripple of confusion went through the audience. This was not the typical corporate speech. Amelia's smile faltered. A cold knot of dread began to form in the pit of her stomach. This was not the script she had imagined. "Tonight," Julian declared, his voice ringing with a newfound conviction. "I want to be honest. I want to be true to myself and to my heart. There is someone in this room who has changed my life in ways I never thought possible. Someone who has shown me what true passion, what true love really is." He paused, letting the suspense build. The silence in the ballroom was absolute, thick with a palpable tension. Amelia's heart was pounding in her chest, a frantic, desperate drumbeat against her ribs. She looked around, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. And then she saw her. Isabella Rossi standing near the stage, her eyes locked on Julian, her expression a mixture of triumph and anticipation. "Isabella." Julian said, his voice soft, but carrying to every corner of the room. "Isabella Rossi, would you please join me on stage?" A collective gasp went through the crowd. Whispers erupted like wildfire. All eyes turned to Isabella as she glided towards the stage, her crimson dress a slash of defiance against the shocked silence. She took Julian's hand, her smile radiant, triumphant. Julian turned to face her, his back to the massive screen that still bore his company's logo. He ignored the shocked faces in the crowd, the frantic whispers, the dawning realization on the faces of those who knew he was a married man. He had eyes only for Isabella. "Isabella," he began, his voice thick with a rehearsed emotion. "You are the most incredible woman I have ever met. You are my soulmate, my everything. I know this is sudden, but I can't live another day without you by my side. I want the world to know how much I love you." And then in front of 100 horrified guests, in front of the world's media, Julian Thorne, the celebrated tech millionaire, got down on one knee. He pulled out a velvet box, and from it, he produced a ring that silenced the room. The Winston Blue Diamond. A magnificent pear-shaped gem of an impossible, mesmerizing blue caught the light and shattered it into 1,000 glittering shards. It was a king's ransom on a platinum band. "Isabella Rossi," Julian's voice boomed through the speakers. "Will you marry me?" Time seemed to stop. For a moment, the only sound was the frantic clicking of cameras. Isabella's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with feigned surprise. This was her moment, the culmination of all her plans, all her ambitions. But just as she opened her mouth to say yes, just as the word of her victory was about to be uttered, a flicker on the giant screen behind them stole the attention of every single person in the room. The Nexus Innovations logo dissolved, and in its place, a new image began to form. It was a scene of breathtaking beauty, a sun-drenched vineyard in Tuscany. And in the center of the frame, a younger, happier Julian Thorne looked into the eyes of his bride, Amelia. The wedding video began to play silent at first, a ghost of a memory flickering to life on the giant screen. The image was jarringly intimate in the vast, opulent ballroom. There was Julian, his face unguarded, his eyes shining with an adoration that was achingly real. He was looking at Amelia, resplendent in a lace wedding gown, her smile a beacon of pure, unadulterated joy. The scene was from their wedding day 4 years prior, a day that now felt like a lifetime ago. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. Julian, still on one knee, froze. He looked up at the screen, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. Isabella, her triumphant smile faltering, followed his gaze. The blood drained from her face. This was not part of the plan. Then the audio kicked in. Julian's voice, younger, more earnest, filled the silent ballroom. It was his wedding speech, a torrent of heartfelt promises and poetic declarations of love. "They say that every man dreams of a moment like this," his voice echoed. "A moment where everything falls into place, where you look at someone and you just know. You know that you've found your other half. Looking at Amelia today, I know that for the first time in my life, I am whole." On screen, the younger Julian raised his glass to Amelia. "To my wife," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "My beautiful, brilliant, incredible wife. You are my compass, my anchor, my one true north. You are not just the love of my life. You are my life. I promise to spend every day of the rest of my life proving that I am worthy of your love. I promise to cherish you, to honor you, and to love you and only you for all of eternity." The irony was so thick, so suffocating, it was almost comical. The guests sat in stunned silence, their gazes shifting from the romantic spectacle on the screen to the sordid tableau on the stage. There was Julian kneeling before his mistress, the echoes of his eternal vows to his wife ringing in his ears. There was Isabella, her face a thunderous canvas of fury and humiliation. And there at her table near the front was Amelia. She rose to her feet, a vision of ethereal calm in the eye of the storm. The midnight blue of her gown seemed to absorb the chaos around her, her posture regale her expression, unreadable. She was no longer a victim. She was a queen about to reclaim her throne. Every eye in the room was now on her as she began to walk towards the stage. Her steps slow, deliberate, and utterly fearless. The gentle swell of her pregnancy was now unmistakable, a silent, powerful testament to the depth of Julian's betrayal. As she reached the stage, a technician acting on a prearranged signal handed her a microphone. She didn't look at Julian, not yet. She addressed the crowd, her voice as clear and as cold as ice. "Good evening, everyone," she began, her voice steady, devoid of any tremor. "I apologize for the interruption. My husband, as you can see, is a man of grand gestures. It seems he has so much love to give, he decided one wife simply wasn't enough." A wave of shocked laughter, quickly stifled, went through the room. Julian scrambled to his feet, his face ashen. "Amelia," he stammered, reaching for her. "What are you doing?" Amelia finally turned her gaze upon him, and for the first time that night, Julian saw his wife. Not the gentle, forgiving Amelia he had taken for granted, but a woman of formidable strength, her eyes blazing with a cold, righteous fury. "What am I doing?" she repeated, her voice dangerously soft. "I'm simply providing a little context, Julian. A little trip down memory lane. I thought your new fiancé," she spat the word like a curse, her eyes flicking to Isabella, "might appreciate knowing the kind of promises you're capable of making. And breaking." She then turned her attention to Isabella, who stood frozen, the magnificent Winston blue diamond on her finger, now feeling like a shackle. "Isabella, isn't it?" Amelia said, her voice dripping with a polite, venomous sweetness. "That's a beautiful ring. The Winston blue. A truly remarkable diamond. Did he tell you its history? It's said to bring its wearer great fortune, but only if the love it represents is true. Otherwise, it's just a very expensive, very beautiful curse." Isabella, for the first time, found her voice. "You have no right," she began, her voice shrill with indignation. "No right." Amelia cut her off, taking a step closer. I am his wife. I am the mother of his unborn child. She let that revelation hang in the air, a bombshell that sent another shockwave through the room. I have every right. You, on the other hand, are a footnote in a story that is about to come to a very abrupt end. Amelia turned back to Julian, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying the weight of a death sentence. Did you really think I wouldn't find out, Julian? Did you think I was that naive, that blind while you were whispering sweet nothings in her ear? I was at home, feeling our baby kick for the first time. While you were buying her diamonds, I was decorating a nursery. You weren't just cheating on me, Julian. You were cheating on our family. You were cheating on the future you promised us. She paused, taking a deep breath, her composure absolute. This grand romantic gesture, she said, gesturing to the pathetic scene on the stage. It's not about love. It's about your ego, your insatiable need for more. More money, more success, more adoration. You didn't fall in love with her, Julian. You fell in love with a younger, more flattering reflection of yourself. Then she delivered the final devastating blow. And you know what the saddest part is? You've not only destroyed our marriage, our family, you've just destroyed the very empire you're so proud of. Julian stared at her, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. He thought this was just about his infidelity, a messy public divorce. He had no idea that the ground beneath his feet was about to crumble. He had no idea that his wife, the quiet, unassuming art curator, was about to bring his entire world crashing down around him. He had underestimated her. And in the world of high-stakes business and brutal betrayals, underestimating your opponent was a fatal mistake. A cavernous silence descended upon the grand ballroom, a void so absolute it seemed to swallow the music, the whispers, and the very air itself. On the massive screen, the image of a beaming Amelia in her wedding dress faded, replaced by the stark, glowing logo of Nexus Innovations, a silent monument to the lie that had just been exposed. Julian remained on one knee, frozen in a grotesque parody of a romantic proposal. The Winston blue diamond on Isabella's finger, which moments ago had been a symbol of triumphant new love, now felt like a shard of ice, a cold, heavy weight of impending doom. Julian's mind, usually a fortress of strategic calculation, was a maelstrom of chaos. This can't be happening. The thought ricocheted through his skull. It's a prank, a sick, twisted joke. He scrambled to his feet, a jerky, uncoordinated movement that betrayed his panic. He forced a laugh, a harsh, grating sound that echoed unnaturally in the stillness. "Well," he said, his voice straining for a lightness it could not find. "It seems my wife has a flair for the dramatic. A little trip down memory lane, it seems. Very sentimental." He turned to the audience, his smile a desperate cracking veneer. "But as I was saying, tonight is about the future." His words trailed off into nothingness. No one was listening. Every single eye in that room, from the powerful venture capitalists at the front tables to the service staff lingering by the walls, was fixed on the woman walking toward the stage. Amelia moved with the slow, deliberate grace of a tidal wave, gathering its strength before it crashes ashore. She was no longer the heartbroken wife. She was an avenging angel, her face a mask of serene, chilling composure. The microphone was in her hand, and as she stepped into the spotlight, she seemed to draw all the light in the room, leaving Julian and Isabella in a sudden, cold shadow. "Good evening, everyone." Her voice, amplified by the speakers, was calm and clear, yet it cut through the silence like a surgeon's scalpel. "I do apologize for the interruption, My husband, Julian Thorne, as you can see, is a man of grand gestures. It seems he has so much love to give." She paused, her eyes sweeping over the crowd. He decided one wife simply wasn't enough. A few shocked gasps, followed by a ripple of nervous, incredulous laughter, broke the tension. Julian's face, already pale, turned a ghastly shade of white. This was not a sentimental prank. This was a declaration of war. "Amelia, stop this," he hissed, taking a step towards her. "You're making a scene. We can discuss this at home." Home. Amelia's laugh was a soft, brittle sound, devoid of all warmth. "You mean the house I built? The bed we shared, the nursery I decorated for our child?" "Which home are you referring to, Julian? Because it seems to me you've made your new home in hotel suites and whispered lies." She turned her gaze on Isabella, who stood frozen, her mind racing. "This is a disaster." He promised he had handled her. He promised she was weak. Isabella's instinct was to fight back, to assert her claim. "You have no right to be up here," she snapped, her voice higher and shriller than she intended. "This is our moment." "Your moment." Amelia's eyes, cold and assessing, raked over Isabella from head to toe. "Your moment of what, exactly? Of triumph, of stealing another woman's husband? Let me tell you what this moment is. It's a lesson in the true cost of things." She gestured to the magnificent diamond on Isabella's hand. "That is the Winston Blue. A truly remarkable diamond. Did he tell you its history? It's said to bring its wearer great fortune, but only if the love it represents is true. Otherwise, it's just a very expensive, very beautiful curse. And darling." Amelia leaned in slightly, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was nonetheless audible to the front rows. "Looking at you now, I'd say you're thoroughly cursed." Then she turned from the personal to the professional, her focus shifting to the audience, specifically to the tables where the most powerful investors were seated. Her entire demeanor changed. The wronged wife receded, and a formidable new persona emerged, the savvy, aggrieved business partner. "Many of you in this room are investors in Nexus Innovations," she began, her tone now crisp and authoritative. "You invested your capital and your trust in a company you believed to be stable-led by a man you believed to be a visionary. But I ask you, how can you trust a man with your millions when he cannot even honor the most sacred personal contract of his life?" This struck a chord. Phones previously held up to record the drama were now being used for a different purpose. Thumbs flew across screens as investors sent frantic, coded messages to their teams. The narrative had shifted from a salacious affair to a question of leadership, of stability, of risk. "Julian likes to tell the story," Amelia continued, pacing the stage slowly, "of how he started Nexus Innovations in a dusty garage with nothing but a dream and a few $1,000s of his own money. It's a fantastic story. It's the myth of the self-made man, the narrative upon which his entire public persona is built. It's a powerful story." She stopped and looked directly at Julian. "And it is a complete and utter lie." Julian's blood ran cold. No, she wouldn't. He had buried that truth so deep, had rewritten history so effectively, that even he barely remembered it. "The truth," Amelia announced, her voice ringing with the clarity of a bell, "is that Nexus Innovations was born not in a garage, but in a lawyer's office. It was funded not by a few $1,000s, but by $50 million of seed capital. Money that did not come from a venture capitalist or a bank loan, that recognized Julian's supposed genius. It came from a single source, my family's trust. The ballroom erupted. The low murmur exploded into a roar of conversation. Julian felt the floor tilt beneath his feet. This was a catastrophic blow, striking at the very heart of his carefully constructed legacy. He was not the self-made titan he claimed to be. He was a man who had been bankrolled by his wife's family. And my grandfather, Amelia's voice sliced through the noise, silencing the room once more, was a man who had seen his share of charlatans and opportunists. He believed in Julian's idea, but he was a shrewd judge of character. He saw the ambition, but he also saw the recklessness. So he insisted on a small, simple clause in the investment agreement. A safeguard. He called it his integrity clause. A morality clause. Julian stared at her, his mind a blank wall of white noise. Morality clause. The words barely registered. It was a faint, dusty memory, a piece of legal jargon he had dismissed as the ramblings of an old man irrelevant in the face of his inevitable success. The clause is very specific, Amelia explained as if lecturing a class. It states that in the event of a gross breach of personal and professional trust, an act of such profound betrayal and public infidelity that it brings shame upon our family name and by extension jeopardizes the ethical standing of the company. His money founded the controlling interest in the shares, purchased with that $50 million, automatically reverts to me. If the previous revelation had been a bombshell, this was a nuclear detonation. The implications were staggering. At the company's current valuation, that initial investment now represented a 40% stake in Nexus Innovations, not a minority share, a controlling interest. "You're lying!" Julian finally found his voice, a desperate, strangled cry. "That's not legal. It wouldn't hold up." "Oh, it's perfectly legal, Mr. Thorne, and it will hold up in any court in the world." The new voice was deep resonant and commanded immediate respect. The crowd parted like the Red Sea as a distinguished silver-haired man in an impeccably tailored suit made his way to the stage. It was Mr. David Chen, a titan of Asian finance, a man whose reputation for integrity was as legendary as his fortune. He was, as Julian knew, with a sinking feeling of absolute dread, the executor of Amelia's family estate. Mr. Chen ascended the stage and stood beside Amelia, placing a protective paternal hand on her shoulder. He looked at Julian, not with anger, but with a profound and heavy disappointment. "I was your father-in-law's closest friend and his personal attorney for 30 years. Mr. Chen said, his voice a low rumble of authority. "I personally drafted that clause. I advised him that while Julian was brilliant, his character was a high-risk investment. The clause was non-negotiable." He turned to the audience. "And as the executor of the estate, I have already filed the necessary paperwork with our legal teams. As of this moment, Miss Amelia Thorne is the majority shareholder and the controlling power of Nexus Innovations." The house of cards did not just collapse. It was annihilated. Julian stumbled backwards, his hand clutching his chest as if he'd been physically shot. He had lost his company. In the span of 10 minutes on the night that was meant to be his crowning glory, he had lost everything. He spun around his mind, searching for a target, for someone to blame other than himself. His wild eyes landed on Isabella. She was trying to back away, to melt into the shadows, her face a mask of pure terror. Her own scheme was unraveling her dreams of wealth and power, turning to ash. "Not so fast, Ms. Rossi." Mr. Chen's voice was like a whip crack. He held up a tablet, its screen glowing. It seems Mr. Thorne's catastrophic lack of judgment was not limited to his marriage. He addressed Julian directly. For the past 6 months, Nexus has been bleeding sensitive data, product roadmaps, R&D on our next-gen processors, confidential financial projections. We knew we had a mole, but we couldn't find the source. We suspected a high-level breach. He paused. We were wrong. The breach wasn't high-level. It was intimate. He turned the tablet to face Julian. On the screen was a decrypted communication log, a series of damning emails and texts between the account Bella Rossi and a senior executive at Aperture Dynamics Nexus Innovations' most ruthless competitor. It was a meticulous record of corporate espionage. Isabella had been seducing him for secrets, playing the part of the love-struck mistress while systematically gutting his company from the inside. Julian stared at the screen, then at Isabella. The betrayal was so complete, so absolute, it was almost surreal. He had been a pawn in 2 different games and had lost them both. All the humiliation, all the rage, all the terror he felt coalesced into a single explosive point. "You!" he snarled, lunging towards her. "You did this!" 2 large security guards materializing as if from nowhere at Mr. Chen's subtle signal intercepted him, holding him back. Isabella shrieked, cowering away from him. "I did what you wanted!" she screamed back, her facade of sophistication shattering completely. "You wanted to be free. You wanted to be with me. I wanted a partner, not a viper who would sell me out to the highest bidder." Julian roared, struggling against the guard's iron grip. The scene had descended into sheer pandemonium. Paparazzi who had been held at the perimeter broke through the lines, their flashes exploding like a volley of gunfire. In the midst of the chaos, one of Mr. Chen's assistants, a stern-faced woman, walked calmly up to the sobbing Isabella. "I believe this belongs to Mr. Chen's client," she said coolly, and with practiced efficiency, she slid the Winston blue diamond from Isabella's finger. The cursed diamond was dropped unceremoniously into a simple evidence bag. That final act seemed to break something in Julian. The fight went out of him. His body went limp, and he sagged against the guards holding him up. His gaze was vacant, his face a hollow mask of utter devastation. He looked out at the sea of faces. Faces of former friends, colleagues, and investors, and saw nothing but contempt, pity, and the morbid fascination of strangers watching a spectacular car crash. He was no longer Julian Thorne, the tech visionary. He was a joke, a failure, a man who had built a glittering empire on a foundation of lies, only to see it all brought down by the 2 women he thought he could control. As the flashbulbs continued to pop, searing the image of his ruin onto the world's collective memory, he finally understood. This wasn't just the end of his career. It was the end of his life as he knew it. He stood on the brightly lit stage of his own, making a fallen king in a kingdom of rubble. Of course, here is a rewritten, significantly longer and more detailed version of Part 5, delving deeper into the aftermath and the characters' new realities. The sun that rose over Singapore the next morning seemed to Julian like a hostile, interrogating eye. He was huddled in the cavernous living room of his penthouse suite, the floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of a world that no longer felt like his. The silence of the suite was a physical presence, a heavy blanket smothering him, punctuated only by the incessant, angry buzzing of his phone on the marble coffee table. He hadn't slept. How could he? Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the flash of cameras. The cold disappointment in Mr. Chen's eyes, the triumphant, chilling calm on Amelia's face. His world had been reduced to the glowing screen of a tablet in his trembling hands. The headlines screamed at him from every major news outlet on the planet. The Thorn Betrayal CEO loses billion-dollar empire in shocking gala proposal. Nexus in freefall. Wife seizes control after morality clause triggered the CEO and the spy. How a scorned wife uncovered a multi-billion-dollar espionage plot. Social media was a raging inferno. The hashtag #GeilerOffLies was trending globally. Memes of his devastated face were already viral. He was no longer a person. He was a spectacle, a cautionary tale for the ages his downfall consumed as entertainment by millions. He finally picked up his phone, his thumb hovering over Amelia's name. He had called 37 times. He had sent 22 rambling, incoherent texts, a digital tapestry of apologies, accusations, and desperate pleas, all unanswered. The silence from her was more damning than any angry reply could ever be. Miles away in a serene, minimalist suite overlooking the gardens by the bay, Amelia was the picture of tranquility. She sat opposite Mr. Chen at a large mahogany table, sipping chamomile tea. Her phone was off. Spread before them were not tabloids, but corporate financial statements, legal documents, and a draft of a press release. There was no celebration, no gloating. There was only work to be done. The board is convening an emergency session via video conference at 0900. Mr. Chen said, his voice calm and steady. The motion to remove Julian as CEO and chairman is a formality at this point. They're terrified. The stock is projected to lose 60% of its value at opening bell. We need to halt trading, Amelia said, her voice clear and decisive. She had already shed the skin of the artist and donned the armor of a leader. We can't let panic dictate our value. We need to issue a statement immediately, one that reassures our employees and our real investors that Nexus is not Julian Thorn. It's bigger than him. Its future is secure. And what is that future, Amelia? Mr. Chen asked, watching her carefully. Amelia looked out the window, her hand resting protectively on her belly. My grandfather invested in an idea, David, an idea about connecting people. Julian turned that into a machine for accumulating wealth and power. He became obsessed with growth, with winning, and he lost sight of the why. The future of Nexus is in rediscovering that why. Technology with a conscience, innovation with integrity. That will be our story. Mr. Chen smiled, a rare, genuine expression of pride. The old man would have been so proud of his granddaughter. She had not only inherited his fortune, she had inherited his wisdom. The weeks that followed were a brutal lesson in consequence for Julian. The emergency board meeting was a swift, bloodless execution. He appeared via a video link, a disheveled, hollowed-out version of himself, and listened in sullency as the people who had once hung on his every word voted unanimously to sever all ties with him. He was stripped of his titles, his stock options, his severance package. The company he had considered an extension of himself had surgically amputated him. His financial ruin was just as swift. Lawsuits from shareholders piled up, and his personal assets were frozen pending the litigation. The sprawling penthouse, the collection of vintage cars, the private jet, they were all just assets to be liquidated, bargaining chips in a game he had already lost. Friends who had once clamored for his attention now crossed the street to avoid him. He was radioactive. Isabella Rossi's downfall was even more public and pathetic. The images of her being led from her chic apartment in handcuffs, her face streaked with tears, were a stark counterpoint to the glamorous photos she had so carefully curated. Her bail was set at an impossibly high figure, and Aperture Dynamics, the company she had betrayed Nexus for, immediately disavowed any knowledge of her actions, leaving her to face the wolves alone. At her first hearing, her lawyer argued she was a pawn, a woman blinded by love. But the prosecution laid out the evidence of encrypted financial transactions and damning communications, painting a picture not of a lovelorn fool, but of a calculating and greedy operative. Her fantasy had ended in a beige-colored courtroom, her future to be decided by strangers. While their worlds imploded, Amelia's was expanding. She returned from Singapore and walked into the glass and steel headquarters of Nexus Innovations, not as the CEO's wife, but as its leader. A palpable tension hung in the air as she addressed the entire company in the main atrium. Employees who had known her only as a pretty face at holiday parties now looked at her with a mixture of fear, awe, and curiosity. "I know there is a lot of uncertainty right now," she began, her voice steady and sure, needing no podium or notes. "You read the headlines, you saw the drama, and you are right to be concerned. But I am not here to talk about the past. I am here to talk about our future." She laid out her vision with a passion and clarity that captivated the room. She spoke not of market caps and quarterly earnings, but of purpose, of building products that helped people, of creating a workplace culture free from the toxic, high-pressure ego that had defined Julian's reign. "For too long," she concluded, "this company has been a reflection of one man's ambition. From today, it will be a reflection of our collective integrity." She didn't receive a standing ovation. The shock was still too raw for that. But she earned something far more valuable, a flicker of hope, a glimmer of respect. The ensuing months were a period of quiet, intense transformation. Amelia, with Mr. Chen as her mentor, proved to be a natural leader. She was decisive, empathetic, and had an artist's eye for talent and potential where others saw only data points. She dismantled the boys' club culture, promoting talented women to leadership positions and fostering an enthronement of genuine collaboration. Nexus began to stabilize, then to heal. She sold the monstrous penthouse and bought a charming, light-filled house in a quiet, tree-lined suburb, a world away from the cold glamour of her former life. She turned one of the rooms into a nursery, painting murals of gentle animals and starry skies on the walls. In this sanctuary, she prepared for motherhood, finding a deep, quiet joy that had been absent from her life for so long. She was building a new life, a new company, and a new family, all on her own terms. Julian, meanwhile, existed in a self-imposed exile. The lawsuits were eventually settled, leaving him with a fraction of his former wealth, enough to live comfortably, but not enough to ever reclaim his place in the pantheon of the ultra-rich. He lived alone in a sterile modern apartment, his days unstructured and empty. He read philosophy, he took long, aimless walks. He sat for hours, staring at the city that had once been his kingdom. For the first time in his life, with all the distractions stripped away, he was forced to confront the man in the mirror, and he didn't like what he saw. He saw the insecurity that had driven his ambition, the ego that had fueled his betrayal, the hollowness at the core of his being. A week before Amelia's due date, he sent her a single handwritten letter. It contained no excuses, no justifications. It was just a simple, humble request to see her one last time, to say what he needed to say in person. After 2 days of deliberation, she agreed. They met in a public park, a neutral ground beneath the gentle shade of old oak trees. Julian was already there, sitting on a bench, looking shockingly ordinary. The expensive suit was gone, replaced by simple trousers and a sweater. The predatory confidence had been replaced by a quiet, weary sadness. Amelia approached her steps, slow and steady, her large, round belly leading the way. She didn't sit down. "Julian," she said, her voice soft without malice. He stood up, his hands shoved awkwardly in his pockets. "Amelia, thank you for coming. You look beautiful, healthy." "I am," she replied simply. "I know I'm sorry isn't enough." He began, his voice hoarse, his gaze fixed on the ground. "I've said it to myself 1,000 times. What I did, it wasn't just a mistake. It was a failure of character, a failure of love. I was so terrified of being ordinary, of being second best, that I built this persona, this Julian Thorne, the visionary, and I started to believe it myself. I thought I needed something new and exciting to prove to the world and to myself that I was extraordinary." He finally looked up, his eyes filled with a profound, soul-deep regret. "And the whole time, the most extraordinary thing in my life was right in front of me. You, our life, our son. I had everything, and I burned it all to the ground for the sake of my own vanity. I didn't just betray you, Amelia. I betrayed myself. I destroyed the best man I ever was, the man you married." Amelia listened in silence, her expression unreadable. She had expected excuses, perhaps even a final attempt at manipulation. She had not expected this raw, painful honesty. "I know there's no going back," he continued, a single tear tracing a path down his cheek. "I don't deserve you. I don't deserve to be a father. But I had to tell you this. I had to let you know that I see it. I finally see it all." A long silence hung between them, filled only by the rustling of leaves and the distant laughter of children. "I'm glad you see it, Julian," Amelia said at last, her voice gentle but firm. "Not for my sake, but for yours. You have a long road ahead of you to figure out who you are without the money and the power." She took a breath. "Our son will be born next week. His name will be Theo, after my grandfather. He will know who his father is. I will show him pictures. I will tell him stories of the good times. I will not raise him on a foundation of anger." She took a step closer, her hand resting on her belly. "But he will also know the truth, not the sordid details, but the essential lesson. He will learn that integrity is the only currency that truly matters. He will learn that true strength is about kindness, not cruelty. And he will learn that a man's worth is measured by the promises he keeps. That will be your legacy to him, Julian. A lesson." She looked at him one last time, a flicker of the love that once was now transformed into a sad, distant compassion. "I forgive you, Julian. I have to, for my own peace and for Theo's. But forgiveness and reconciliation are two different things. Our story is over." With that, she turned and walked away, not looking back. She walked towards her future, towards her new life, towards the waiting arms of motherhood. Julian stood frozen, watching her go, until she was out of sight. He was alone, but for the first time he felt a flicker not of despair, but of something else. The devastating, painful and necessary beginning of penance. The ashes of his old life were behind him, and before him a vast empty landscape where perhaps something new and honest could finally begin to grow. And there you have it, a story that proves that hell hath no fury. Like a woman scorned, especially when that woman is smart, resourceful, and about to become the majority shareholder of her husband's company. Amelia's story is a powerful reminder that true strength isn't about avoiding heartbreak, but about how we rise from the ashes. It's a story of empowerment, of taking control of your own narrative, and of serving revenge, not hot, not cold, but with a controlling interest and a killer business plan. What did you think of Amelia's epic takedown? Was Julian's downfall deserved? Let us know in the comments below. We read every single one. What happens when a man has everything? $1 billion empire, a name that commands respect, and a beautiful pregnant wife carrying his legacy. Now what happens when he risks it all for a moment of cruel vanity? In tonight's story, we enter the world of a man who, in front of the woman he swore to protect, chose to impress the one he shouldn't. A pregnant wife asks her husband for a simple hug, a moment of connection. Instead, he shoves her away. But this is not just a story of betrayal. It's a story of consequences of a fall so spectacular it creates a legend. Stay with us as we witness the shove that cost a millionaire everything and the instant gut-wrenching regret that followed. The air in their penthouse apartment was always the same, chilled to a precise 22 degrees Celsius, smelling faintly of Julian's expensive cologne and the white lilies Amelia arranged herself every morning. It was a beautiful prison, perched 50 stories above the bustling heart of the city, with floor-to-ceiling windows that displayed the world she was no longer truly a part of. Amelia, 6 months into her pregnancy, often stood at those windows, her hands cradling the gentle swell of her belly, and watched the tiny, purposeful lights of the cars below, wondering if any of them held people who were genuinely happy. Her husband, Julian Croft, was a man sculpted from ambition and old money. His family's name was etched onto skyscrapers, university halls, and philanthropic plaques. He had inherited an empire, and to his credit, had doubled its worth with a kind of ruthless brilliance that both captivated and terrified the business world. He was handsome, with sharp, intelligent eyes, and a smile that could disarm world leaders, yet it rarely reached his eyes when he looked at her. In the beginning, their love had been a whirlwind. He had pursued her with a single-minded intensity that had left her breathless. He'd made her feel like the center of his vast universe. But once the wedding bands were on their fingers, the universe recentered itself around his true love, Croft Holdings. Amelia had become another one of his prized acquisitions, a beautiful accessory meant to produce the next heir. The pregnancy should have brought them closer. It had instead driven the final wedge between them. Amelia craved the simple things: a hand held during a walk, a shared laugh over a silly movie, a hug. Especially a hug. She felt the profound aching need for his arms to wrap around her, and the child growing within her, a silent acknowledgement that they were in this together. But Julian's touch had become perfunctory, a brief kiss on the cheek in the morning, before he disappeared into a flurry of phone calls and a weary pat on the shoulder at night, before he turned his back to her in their king-sized bed. His distance had become a physical presence in their home, a cold ghost that sat between them at the dinner table. And recently that ghost had acquired a name, Isabella Rossi. Isabella was everything Amelia was not. She was far where Amelia was water. A sleek, raven-haired art dealer with a razor-sharp wit and a reputation for charming, powerful men. Julian insisted she was just a business associate, a vital connection for his new contemporary art foundation. But Amelia saw the way his eyes lingered on Isabella during the few events they all attended. She saw the private jokes, the shared glances that crackled with an energy he no longer reserved for his wife. She saw the texts that would make him smile at his phone, a smile she hadn't received in months. The breaking point was to be set against the most idyllic backdrop imaginable, the annual Croft Foundation Charity Gala held this year at the breathtaking Banyan Tree Phuket in Thailand. Julian had booked out a significant portion of the ultra-exclusive resort. It was a masterful display of wealth and power, with billionaires, politicians, and socialites flying in from all corners of the globe. For Amelia, it was just a larger, more opulent cage. She had spent weeks dreading it. Her body was changing, and while she was proud of the life she was nurturing, she felt ungainly and tired. The couture gowns Julian's assistant had procured for her felt like costumes. On the night of the gala, she chose a flowing emerald green silk dress that draped elegantly over her bump. She'd had her hair styled in soft waves and wore the sapphire earrings Julian had given her on their first anniversary. She hoped with a desperate, foolish flicker of optimism that he might look at her and see the woman he had married, not just the vessel for his heir. The gala was in full swing on a sprawling terrace overlooking the Andaman Sea. The sunset bled across the sky in hues of orange and violet, a perfect postcard that felt like a mockery of her inner turmoil. Fairy lights twinkled in the palm trees, and the soft strains of a string quartet mingled with the clinking of champagne glasses and murmured conversations. Julian was in his element, a king holding court. He moved through the crowd with an easy, predatory grace, shaking hands, clapping backs, his laughter booming with confidence. Amelia followed a few steps behind a dutiful shadow. He introduced her as my lovely wife Amelia, with a proprietary hand on the small of her back, but the gesture felt like a brand, not an embrace. And then she saw her. Isabella. She was standing near the marble balustrade, holding a flute of champagne, looking like a panther in a sea of swans. She wore a backless crimson dress that clung to her every curve. She was laughing with a senator, her head tilted back, a column of pale throat exposed. When she saw Julian, her red-lipped smile widened. Julian's path changed course, veering directly towards Isabella, Amelia still in tow. Isabella. "You look sensational," Julian said, his voice a low purr that Amelia hadn't heard directed at her in years. "Julian, darling," Isabella responded, her eyes flicking dismissively over Amelia's baby bump before locking back onto Julian. "You certainly know how to throw a party. The ambiance is divine." "Only the best," he said, his ego preening under her praise. They fell into an easy, exclusive conversation, their bodies angled towards each other, creating an invisible wall that shut Amelia out. They talked about art auctions in Geneva and vineyard acquisitions in Tuscany. Amelia stood there, a silent, pregnant ghost, feeling the weight of 100 pairs of eyes. She could feel the whispers, the pitying glances from the other wives who knew the score. Her cheeks burned with a humiliation that was hot and suffocating. She needed an anchor. She needed to feel, just for a second, that she wasn't completely alone on this island of gilded misery. All she wanted was a hug. A simple grounding hug from the man who was the father of her child. She took a small step forward, gently touching his arm. "Julian," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He turned his brow, furrowing in annoyance at the interruption. "What is it, Amelia? I was just wondering if I could have a hug," she asked, the words feeling fragile and pathetic in the humid night air. Her heart hammered against her ribs. It was such a small request, a plea for a crumb of affection. Isabella watched them, a smirk playing on her lips. Her eyes held a cruel, triumphant gleam. It was a test, and she knew it. Julian looked from Amelia's pleading, vulnerable face to Isabella's cool, challenging one. A flicker of something unreadable passed through his eyes. Was it irritation? Contempt? In that split second, he made a choice. He chose his audience. He chose his mistress. "Amelia, for God's sake, don't be so needy." He snapped his voice, sharp and loud enough for those nearby to hear. "This isn't the time or the place." And then he did it. As she instinctively swayed closer, seeking the comfort she'd begged for, he raised a hand and shoved her away. It wasn't a violent, brutal push, but it was firm, decisive, and utterly dismissive. He pushed her by the shoulder, a gesture that said, "You are in my way. You are an embarrassment." Amelia stumbled backward, her heel catching on the smooth marble floor. The gasp that escaped her lips was silent, stolen by the shock. The world seemed to slow down. The music, the chatter, the sound of the ocean, it all faded into a dull roar. The only thing she could see was Julian's face, cold and dismissive, and Isabella's triumphant smirk, a victory flag planted on the ruins of her heart. In that horrifying, crystal-clear moment, Amelia understood. She was not his partner. She was not his love. She was a contract, a duty, and in that moment, an obstacle. The shove hadn't just pushed her body away. It had shattered the last fragile pane of glass that was her hope for their marriage. And as she stood there swaying slightly, her hand flying protectively to her belly, she saw the first flicker of something else in Julian's eyes. It was faint, a tiny spark in the cold darkness. It was the dawning, sickening realization of what he had just done, broadcast on a stage of his own making. It was the shadow of instant regret. The regret in Julian's eyes was a fleeting thing, a brief storm cloud passing over a barren landscape. It was the regret of a strategist who had made a tactical error, not the remorse of a husband who had wounded his wife. He had miscalculated. The shove had been too public, the gasp from the surrounding guests too audible. He saw the shift in their expressions, from admiration to shock, from envy to thinly veiled contempt. He had wanted to look powerful and detached in front of Isabella. Instead, he looked like a bully. Isabella's smirk widened for a fraction of a second before she masterfully replaced it with a look of feigned concern. She laid a hand on Julian's arm, a gesture of proprietary comfort. "Oh dear," she murmured, her voice dripping with insincerity. "Is she all right? Pregnancy can make one so emotional." The word emotional was a dagger painting Amelia as unstable, her request for a hug as a symptom of a hysterical condition. It was a perfect venomous defense of Julian's cruelty. But Amelia didn't hear her. She was locked in a bubble of ringing silence. The shove itself hadn't hurt her physically. It was the sheer brutal symbolism of the act. He had physically cast her out. In front of everyone. In front of her. The humiliation was a physical force pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. Her vision swam the twinkling fairy lights, blurring into meaningless streaks of color. She didn't cry. She didn't scream or cause a scene. Something within her, something that had been slowly dying for months, finally broke. And in its place, a strange and terrible calm began to settle. It was the calm of absolute certainty. The calm of knowing there was nothing left to save. With a quiet dignity that belied the storm raging inside her, Amelia straightened up. She looked directly at Julian, her gaze holding his for a long, silent moment. She wanted to sear the image into her memory. The man she had loved standing beside his mistress, his face a mask of annoyance and ill-conceived damage control. She let him see the raw, unfiltered pain in her eyes, but she did not give him the satisfaction of her tears. Then she turned. Without another word, she walked away. She didn't storm off or flee. Her steps were measured and deliberate as she navigated through the sea of stunned faces. The crowd parted for her as if she were a ghost, their whispers following her like the rustle of dead leaves. She walked past the string quartet, past the cascading floral arrangements, and out of the light of the terrace, disappearing into the shadows of the resort's lush, winding pathways. Julian watched her go, a knot of cold fury and anxiety tightening in his gut. Fury at her for creating the situation, and a gnawing anxiety about the consequences. He had to fix this. He had to control the narrative. "She's just overtired," he said loudly to the nearest cluster of guests, forcing a dismissive chuckle. "You know how it is. We'll have a nightcap and she'll be right as rain in the morning." He turned back to Isabella, expecting her to help him smooth things over. But Isabella was no longer looking at him. Her gaze was fixed on something over his shoulder, her eyes wide with genuine alarm. "Julian," she breathed, her voice tight. Following her gaze, Julian turned and looked back towards the terrace entrance, where Amelia had just disappeared. The space was now filled with panicked resort staff, their crisp white uniforms a stark contrast to the evening's glamour. A man in a suit was speaking urgently into a walkie-talkie. The word he kept repeating cut through the renewed chatter of the party guests' tsunami. A low, guttural roar began to build a sound that seemed to come from the very depths of the earth, drowning out the string quartet. It was a sound utterly alien to the tranquil paradise. The sea, which moments before had been a placid sheet of purple and black, was behaving strangely. The water was rapidly receding from the shoreline, exposing coral and sand that hadn't seen the air in decades, as if the ocean itself was taking a deep, monstrous breath. Panic erupted. The carefully constructed facade of the gala shattered in an instant. The clinking of glasses was replaced with screams. Billionaires and dignitaries, stripped of their power and prestige, became just terrified people. A primal stampeding fear took hold as the staff trained for this very possibility began shouting directions to the high ground. "Everyone, move to the main hall. Now move." Julian stood frozen for a second, his mind struggling to process the two seismic events that had occurred in the space of 3 minutes. The personal earthquake of his actions, and the literal one that was now promising to swallow them whole. His first instinct, the one ingrained in him since birth, was self-preservation. He grabbed Isabella's arm. "Come on," he yelled over the growing roar. "We have to go." But as he started to pull her towards the designated safe zone, a different, more terrifying thought pierced through his panic. Amelia. She had walked off into the darkness towards the low-lying villas that dotted the path back to their private suite. She was alone, emotional, and walking directly into the path of the impending wave. The image of her pregnant and vulnerable flashed in his mind. The baby, his heir, his child. The instant regret he'd felt after the shove was a pale, insignificant thing compared to the tidal wave of pure terror that crashed over him now. The potential loss of social standing was nothing compared to the potential loss of his wife and child. "Julian, what are you doing?" Isabella shrieked, trying to pull him back as he let go of her and turned against the tide of fleeing guests. "The safe zone is this way." He ignored her. For the first time that night, for the first time in months, Isabella Rossi and her opinion were utterly irrelevant. He pushed through the panicked crowd, his eyes scanning the dark, winding pathways that led down towards the sea. Amelia, he screamed, his voice raw, with a fear he had never known. Amelia. The world was chaos. People were tripping, falling their evening finery, becoming a hindrance. The roar of the ocean was now deafening, a physical pressure against his eardrums. He saw the first signs of the returning water in the distance, not a gentle wave, but a churning, angry white line on the horizon, growing taller with impossible speed. He ran his heart, pounding a frantic rhythm of her name. Amelia, Amelia, Amelia. He stumbled down the path she had taken his mind, a maelstrom of horrific possibilities. The shove, his cruel words, her devastated face. What if that was the last time he ever saw her? What if his last words to her were a dismissive snap? The carefully constructed walls of Julian Croft's world were not just cracking, they were being pulverized by a force of nature and a force of his own making. In his desperation, running towards the woman he had just pushed away, he understood a terrifying truth. He had shoved her directly into the path of annihilation, and if he didn't find her, her ghost and his regret would haunt him for whatever remained of his life. The tsunami, when it came, was not the towering monster of cinematic nightmares, but it was powerful enough to be catastrophic. The first wave surged through the lower levels of the resort, a churning torrent of seawater, sand, and debris. It smashed through the glass walls of the beachfront villas, obliterated the immaculate gardens, and turned the serene pathways into raging canals. Julian found Amelia not a moment too soon. He had spotted her near a small ornamental bridge, dazed and disoriented by the alarms and the roar. He'd reached her just as the water surged up the hillside, grabbing her hand and pulling her up a steep stone staircase that led to the resort's main elevated lobby, the designated high ground safe zone. They had made it with seconds to spare, the water licking at the steps below them. In the chaotic aftermath, huddled among hundreds of other shell-shocked guests and staff in the grand lobby. The adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a chilling silence between them. Julian, panting and soaked, tried to speak the words. "I'm sorry," forming on his lips, but they felt hollow and absurd in the face of what had just happened. Amelia, however, seemed unnervingly calm. She was dry, safe, but her focus was entirely inward. Her hand rested on her belly, her brow furrowed in concentration. Then her face went pale, and she winced a sharp intake of breath. "Amelia, what is it? Are you hurt?" Julian asked, his voice thick with a new kind of fear. "It's the baby," she whispered, her eyes wide with terror. "Something's wrong. It's too soon." She clutched her abdomen as another wave of pain hit her, more intense this time. The stress, the emotional devastation, the panicked run, it had all been too much. The resort's on-site medic, a harried but competent Australian doctor, rushed to her side. After a quick, tense examination amidst the chaos, his face grew grim. "She's having contractions," he said to Julian, his voice low and urgent. "They're premature, but they're consistent. The fall she mentioned, and the severe emotional distress, it can trigger this. We need to get her to a proper hospital, now." The unraveling of Julian Croft's perfect life was swift and merciless. The tsunami had crippled the local infrastructure. Getting off the island was a logistical nightmare. But Julian, for the first time, used his immense power for something other than profit. He was a man possessed. He barked orders into his satellite phone, chartering a helicopter, arranging for a medical team to be on standby, at the best international hospital in Bangkok. He spared no expense, his desperation a blank check. During the tense helicopter ride, Amelia refused to look at him. She lay on a stretcher, her face a mask of pain and focus, attended by a medic. All of Julian's power, all his wealth was useless. He couldn't stop her pain. He couldn't undo what he had done. He was just a terrified man in a very expensive helicopter, watching the woman he had broken fight for the life of their child. At the hospital in Bangkok, she was whisked away into the maternity emergency wing. Julian was left in a sterile white waiting room that felt colder and more isolating than his penthouse. Hours bled into one another. He tried to call his office to manage the fallout from the gala, but the words and figures on his screen were meaningless. His entire empire felt like a pile of ash compared to the closed door of the delivery room. Isabella called. He saw her name flash on the screen and swiped to decline without a second thought. She called again. He turned the phone off. The thought of her, of their flirtation, of the shove that had been for her benefit, filled him with a self-loathing so profound it made him physically sick. Finally, a doctor, a kind-faced Thai woman, entered the waiting room. Her expression was guarded. "Mr. Croft," she began, her voice gentle. "Your wife has been stabilized. We've managed to stop the premature labor for now. She and the baby are resting." Relief washed over Julian so intensely his knees felt weak. "Oh, thank God. Can I see her?" The doctor hesitated. "She is resting and she has requested not to have any visitors at the moment. I'm not a visitor. I'm her husband. Mr. Croft." The doctor said, her gaze firm but compassionate. "Your wife has been through a significant ordeal, both physically and emotionally. The preliminary reports from the Phuket medic mentioned acute emotional distress as a primary trigger. For the health of the pregnancy, it is imperative that she remain in a stress-free, calm environment. We must respect her wishes." The message was clear. You are the stress. You are the danger. Defeated. Julian sank into a chair. He was barred from seeing his own wife. He was the cause of the crisis. He ran his hands over his face, the mask of the invincible tycoon stripped away, leaving only a broken man. It was in this moment of utter desolation that a new piece of information arrived, delivered by his head of security via a terse email. While Julian had been focused on Amelia, his team had been vetting the gala's attendees, a standard post-event procedure. Usually he would have ignored the report, but he opened it, desperate for any distraction. And there, under Isabella Rossi's name, was a note that made the blood drain from his face. Isabella Rossi. Name is an alias. Real name, Isabella Rinaldi. Father Marco Rinaldi. Former CEO of Rinaldi Holdings, a major competitor that Croft Holdings acquired in a hostile takeover 10 years ago. Marco Rinaldi committed suicide 3 months after the acquisition. Isabella would have been 19. The world tilted on its axis. It wasn't about art deals or charming a powerful man. It had never been about that. It was about revenge. Isabella hadn't been a dalliance. She had been an enemy combatant. Every smile, every shared secret, every flattering word had been a weapon. She had been systematically dismantling his life from the inside, and he had welcomed her in handing her the tools himself. She had targeted his greatest vulnerability, his ego and his marriage. The public humiliation at the gala wasn't just a byproduct of her seduction, it was the entire point. She had wanted to break him, and she had chosen the most public, most intimate way to do it, The shove had not been her test for him. It had been her graduation ceremony. She had succeeded. He thought back to every conversation, how she'd subtly advised him on a risky acquisition that was now underperforming, how she'd casually mentioned a rumor that had led him to fire a loyal, long-standing board member. It was all a tapestry of sabotage, and he had been too arrogant, too blinded by her flattery to see it. He sat in the silent, sterile hospital waiting room, 1,000 miles from home, barred from his wife's bedside, his unborn child's life hanging in the balance, and the full scope of his stupidity laid bare. He had not just been cruel, he had been a fool. He had pushed away the one person who had ever truly been on his side for a woman who was actively engineering his downfall. The regret was no longer a flicker or a storm. It was a permanent, poisoning part of his soul. The unraveling was complete. He had lost everything that mattered, all by his own hand. For a week, the hospital was Amelia's sanctuary and Julian's purgatory. The doctors placed her on strict bed rest, monitoring the baby around the clock. The threat of premature labor had subsided, but it loomed like a constant unspoken threat. In the quiet of her private room, with the rhythmic beep of the fetal heart monitor, as her only companion, Amelia, began to heal. The healing, however, was not of the kind Julian would have hoped for. It was not a healing that would lead back to him. The shock had given way to a profound, crystalline clarity. Every excuse she had ever made for him, every hope she had clung to, dissolved. The shove was not an aberration. It was a revelation. It was the truest expression of his regard for her. She thought about Isabella not with hatred, but with a strange sense of pity. To be so consumed with someone else's destruction was its own kind of prison. Amelia in her sterile white room felt freer than she had in years. Julian, meanwhile, was a ghost haunting the hospital corridors. He had booked the suite opposite hers, leaving the door ajar in the vain hope that she might emerge. He sent flowers, but they were politely returned by the nurses. He sent handwritten apologies, long rambling letters, filled with his newfound revelations about Isabella and his own foolishness, but she never acknowledged them. He was a king without a kingdom, a general with no one to command. His only contact was the compassionate doctor who gave him curt professional updates. The baby's heartbeat is strong. Mrs. Croft is responding well to the treatment. Never your wife. Always Mrs. Croft. His reckoning came on the 8th day. A sharp, professionally dressed woman he didn't recognize arrived at the hospital. She introduced herself as Eleanor Vance, Amelia's lawyer. She was a woman in her late 40s, with intelligent eyes that held no sympathy whatsoever. She handed him a thick envelope. "Mr. Croft," she said, her voice crisp and devoid of emotion. "My client, Amelia Croft, has instructed me to serve you these papers. They are a petition for legal separation to be followed by a divorce upon the birth of the child." Julian stared at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. "A divorce? She can't. We haven't even spoken. My client feels there is nothing left to be said," Eleanor Vance replied coolly. "Furthermore, she has instructed me to activate Clause 11B of your prenuptial agreement." Julian's blood ran cold. He knew his own prenup by heart. It was an ironclad fortress of his own design, meant to protect his ancestral wealth from any and all claims. Clause 11B. He scrambled to remember the specifics. It was a minor clause, one his lawyers had insisted on as a show of good faith at the time. Something he had dismissed as sentimental nonsense. Clause 11B. The lawyer said, as if reading his mind, the infidelity and endangerment clause. It states that in the event of proven marital infidelity, that leads to proven physical or emotional endangerment of the spouse or unborn children. A significant portion of shared assets acquired during the marriage are to be transferred to the injured party for the explicit purpose of securing their and the child's lifelong welfare. Her medical reports from Phuket and this hospital, citing acute emotional distress as the trigger for her premature labor, constitute proof of endangerment. And we have over a dozen sworn affidavits from guests at the gala who witnessed your public affair with Ms. Rosie and the subsequent physical assault. Julian felt the floor drop out from under him. That clause was symbolic. It's not meant to be. It's meant to be exactly what it is, Mr. Croft. A consequence. Amelia is not seeking your fortune. She is securing her child's future, a future independent of you. The assets listed for transfer include the Tribeca townhouse and a controlling interest in the Archlight Fund, the seed fund you started with her inheritance, if I'm not mistaken. He was stunned into silence. Amelia's inheritance, a modest sum he had scoffed at, but agreed to invest for her, had been the seed for one of his most successful venture capital funds. He had grown it into a multi-million-dollar asset. An asset that, according to this, was now legally hers. She wasn't just leaving him. She was taking a piece of his empire with her, a piece he had built from her own forgotten capital. It was a move of such strategic brilliance, he would have admired it if it weren't being used against him. She can't do this alone, he finally stammered. She doesn't know anything about managing a fund. Eleanor Vance allowed herself a small, cold smile. You've underestimated your wife for a very long time, Mr. Croft. You might be surprised to learn that before she met you, Amelia was completing her MBA with a specialization in venture capitalism, a degree she abandoned to support your career. She is more than capable. This was a version of Amelia he didn't know, a part of her past he had never bothered to learn. The quiet, gentle woman he had married had a mind like a steel trap, and he had foolishly left the key in the lock. His phone buzzed. It was his CFO. He answered, his voice hollow. Julian, we have a problem, his CFO said, his voice strained with panic. A big one. The Rinaldi leak. Julian's heart sank even further. What leak? It's everywhere. An anonymous source has leaked documents to the press. Damning documents. Details of the hostile takeover of Rinaldi Holdings. Internal memos about the pressure campaign. They're painting you as the man who drove Marco Rinaldi to suicide. And the source also leaked evidence of your affair with his daughter Isabella. They're framing it as you preying on the vulnerable child of the man you destroyed. It's a character assassination, Julian. Our stock is plummeting. The board is calling for an emergency meeting. It was Isabella's masterstroke, her final devastating blow. She hadn't just humiliated him personally. She had used their affair as the accelerant to burn his corporate reputation to the ground. She had perfectly crafted a narrative that made him look like a monster. He ended the call, his hand trembling. In the space of 10 minutes, he had been served divorce papers, lost a significant asset to the wife he'd scorned, and had his public image and his company's stock shredded by the mistress he'd courted. He looked up at Elena Vance, who was watching him with detached professionalism. Tell her I'll sign. He said the words, tasting like ash. There was no fight left in him. He had been outmaneuvered by two women he had fundamentally fatally misjudged. He was no longer in control. This was not a negotiation or a problem he could solve with money. This was a reckoning. It was the bill for his cruelty, his arrogance, his blindness, and it had finally come due. He was alone in a hospital corridor, stripped of his wife, his pride, and a piece of his empire, with the rest of it burning down around him. While Julian's world was imploding, Amelia's was quietly being rebuilt on her own terms. After 2 weeks, she was discharged from the Bangkok hospital stable, but still fragile. She did not return to the gilded cage of the penthouse. Instead, Elena Vance arranged for her to be flown by private medical jet, not to their shared home city, but to Geneva, Switzerland. There, nestled by the lake, was a quiet private clinic known for its discretion and excellent prenatal care. This was Amelia's first move, and it was a brilliant one. By relocating to neutral territory, she placed herself physically and legally outside of Julian's immediate sphere of influence. She created a sanctuary where she could focus on her health and plan her next steps without the threat of his presence. The Archlight Fund, now legally under her control, became her project. From her sunlit room overlooking Lake Geneva, she didn't just rest. She worked. She pulled up the files on her tablet. Her mind, once dulled by years of being a socialite, now sparking with its old fire. The MBA she had abandoned felt like a lifetime ago, but the knowledge was still there, dormant but intact. She saw the fund's potential, but she also saw Julian's reckless, ego-driven investments. She saw the rot he had allowed to creep in while he was distracted by Isabella. She wasn't alone in this. Her lawyer, Elena Vance, was more than just a legal eagle. She was a connector. She introduced Amelia via secure video calls to a new financial advisor, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Sophia, who had a reputation for turning troubled funds around. Sophia, it turned out, had her own history with Julian Croft. He had once pushed her out of a major deal, dismissing her as too cautious. The opportunity to help Amelia dismantle a piece of his empire was a challenge she relished. Together, the three women, Amelia the strategist, Elena the legal shield, and Sophia the financial weapon, formed an unlikely but formidable alliance. Their counterattack was not loud or explosive. It was silent, precise, and devastating. Amelia's first directive was to liquidate all the high-risk, flashy assets Julian had acquired. This included a stake in a volatile tech startup and a portfolio of abstract art Julian had purchased on Isabella's expert advice. Sophia executed the sales with ruthless efficiency, staunching the bleeding and freeing up capital. The art, purchased at an inflated price, sold for a fraction of its cost, solidifying the fact that Isabella's advice had been pure sabotage. Next, Amelia guided Sophia to reinvest in stable long-term growth sectors that Julian had ignored: renewable energy, biotechnology, and sustainable agriculture. These were fields she had been passionate about during her studies, fields Julian had laughed off as unsexy. It was a quiet rebellion, a complete reversal of his financial philosophy. The fund was being reborn in her image: patient, intelligent, and forward-thinking. Meanwhile, the Rinaldi leak that Isabella had engineered was having catastrophic effects on Croft Holdings. The stock was in freefall. The board, once a collection of Julian sycophants, was now in open revolt. They were terrified of the public relations nightmare. The story was too sordid, too perfect. The corporate predator destroying a rival, then seducing and betraying the man's orphaned daughter. It didn't matter that Isabella was a willing participant and a saboteur herself. The narrative was set in stone. This was where Elena Vance played her MasterCard. She had been digging into Isabella's life, and she found more than just her true identity. She found Isabella's weakness. Isabella, for all her cunning, was not a financial genius. She had been propped up by a silent partner, someone who had funded her elaborate lifestyle and given her the capital to appear as a legitimate art dealer. Elena's investigators uncovered this partner. It was Marcus Thorne, Julian's biggest corporate rival, the head of Thorne Industries. Thorne had been the one whispering in Isabella's ear, guiding her revenge and using her as a pawn in his long-running war with Julian. The goal was simple: destabilize Croft Holdings from the inside with the affair and the bad investments. Then from the outside, with the PR scandal, driving the stock price so low that Thorne Industries could initiate a hostile takeover of its own. Instead of leaking this information to the press, which would be messy and unpredictable, Eleanor did something far more clever. She arranged a private off-the-record meeting with two of the most powerful and now most nervous members of the Croft Holdings board. In that meeting, she laid out the entire conspiracy. She presented the evidence of Isabella's true identity, her connection to Thorne, and the coordinated attack on their company. But she didn't offer this information for free. Her price was simple. In exchange for the evidence that would save their company from Thorne's clutches, the board was to approve a full uncontested settlement for Amelia's divorce, one that formally and permanently signed over the Archlight Fund and the Tribeca townhouse with no further legal challenges. Secondly, they were to publicly issue a statement clearing Amelia's name of any involvement and acknowledging the immense personal distress she had suffered. Cornered, the board members had no choice. Saving the multi-billion-dollar corporation was more important than protecting their disgraced CEO's assets. They agreed. Julian found out when his own board served him the ultimatum. They confronted him with the evidence of the Thorne conspiracy. They informed him that they had already made a deal with his wife's lawyer. He was to step down as CEO, at least temporarily issue a public apology, and not contest the divorce settlement. If he refused, they would oust him publicly and leave him to fight Thorne on his own. The regret Julian felt had now morphed into a state of perpetual shock. He had believed he was the player, the master of the game. But he had been a pawn for everyone. A pawn for Isabella in her quest for revenge. A pawn for Marcus Thorne in his corporate war. And now, a pawn for his own board in their bid for survival. The ultimate checkmate, however, came from Amelia. In a final, devastatingly elegant move, the newly restructured Archlight Fund under Amelia's control used its fresh capital to buy a significant block of Croft Holdings stock at its rock-bottom price. It wasn't a controlling interest, but it was large enough to give her a seat at the table, a voice in the company's future. Julian sat in his empty penthouse, the lilies long since wilted, watching the business news. A chyron slid across the bottom of the screen. Archlight Fund, headed by newly appointed CEO Amelia Croft, acquires major stake in beleaguered Croft Holdings. He had pushed her away, and in doing so he had not only lost her, but he had inadvertently created his most formidable business rival. She hadn't just left him. She had circled back and was now in a position of power over the very empire he had prized above her. The counterattack was complete. He had nothing left. Julian Croft hit rock bottom not with a bang, but with the deafening silence of an empty life. The board had forced him into a leave of absence, a polite term for exile. He was still the majority shareholder, but he was a king with no crown barred from the building that bore his family's name. His days were a long, echoing stretch of nothing. He'd walk the halls of the penthouse, the silence amplifying the memories of Amelia's gentle presence, a presence he had so carelessly erased. He tried to fight back. He called Isabella once, a last desperate attempt to understand. She answered, her voice cold and bored. "What do you want, Julian?" Why was all he could manage. She laughed, a sound like shattering glass. "You really don't know?" You destroyed my father. You stood at his funeral and talked about necessary market corrections. You took our legacy and sold it for parts. I just returned the favor. I took your legacy, your perfect wife, your perfect reputation, and showed the world how hollow it was. Consider us even. She hung up. There was no remorse, no emotion. It was simply a transaction, now complete. His isolation was absolute. His fair-weather friends had vanished. His business associates now saw him as toxic. He was left with nothing but his money and the gaping wound where his life used to be. The regret was no longer a thought or an emotion. It was the air he breathed. It was in the taste of his food, the reflection in the mirror. He saw his actions on a continuous loop. His dismissal of Amelia, his vanity with Isabella, the shove. That damnable, arrogant, life-altering shove. He knew he had to see her. Not to ask for forgiveness. He knew he was far beyond that. But to perform one last necessary act. He needed to surrender. He flew to Geneva. He didn't know where she was staying, but he didn't need to. He went to the offices of Archlight Fund, now headquartered in a sleek, modern building overlooking the Rhone. He simply sat in the lobby, a ghost in a $1,000 suit, and waited. After 3 hours, Elena Vance appeared. Her expression was as unforgiving as ever. "She will see you," she said, her tone suggesting it was against her better judgment. 5 minutes. Her doctor is present. Any sign of distress, and you will be removed." He was led not to an office, but to a comfortable, sunlit lounge. Amelia was there, sitting on a sofa. She was now heavily pregnant, her due date clearly approaching. She looked radiant. Motherhood suited her. There was a calm strength in her eyes he had never seen before. A discreet older woman, her doctor, sat in a nearby chair. Amelia didn't smile, but her face was not filled with the hatred he expected. It was something far more unnerving neutrality. She looked at him as if he were a business acquaintance from a long-ago forgotten deal. "Julian," she said, her voice steady. He had rehearsed 100 speeches, but they all evaporated in her presence. He was left with only the raw, ugly truth. "Amelia," he began, his voice cracking. "I didn't come here to ask you to take me back. I didn't come to make excuses. I know what I did. I know who I was." He took a step closer but stopped when he saw Elena tense. "The night of the gala. When I pushed you, it wasn't just about Isabella. It was about me. It was because you asked for something real, something honest. And I had become so fake that I couldn't handle it. Your request for a hug felt like an accusation. It held up a mirror to the man I'd become, a hollow shell. And I hated what I saw. So I broke the mirror. I pushed you away because it was easier than facing myself." Tears welled in his eyes, hot and shameful. These were not tears of self-pity, but tears of genuine, agonizing clarity. Everything that has happened since losing the company, the money, my reputation, I deserve it. All of it. I see that now. Isabella didn't destroy me. I destroyed myself. I had the single most valuable thing in the universe, a woman who loved me, a family. And I traded it for vanity. It was the stupidest, most unforgivable deal I ever made. He finally looked at her, at the child she carried. His child. He or she. Our baby deserves better than me. Better than the man I was. I know that. I'm not asking for a role in your life. I'm forfeiting my claim. I'm here to sign whatever you need me to sign. I'll provide whatever financial support you ask, but I will stay away. I won't contaminate your peace. You have built something new, something better from the mess I made. You deserve to have it free and clear of me." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a single document, placing it on the coffee table. It was a legal affidavit drafted by his own lawyer, relinquishing his parental rights to be enacted at her sole discretion. It was the only thing he had left to give her his absence. Amelia looked at the document, then back at him. For the first time, a flicker of emotion crossed her face. It was not anger or love, but a deep, profound sorrow. "You still don't understand, do you?" she said softly. "I never wanted to take your empire, Julian. I never wanted to ruin you. I just wanted a husband. And this child will need a father." She picked up the affidavit, and in a single decisive movement, she tore it in half, then in half again, and let the pieces fall to the table. "I will not take your rights away," she said, her voice gaining strength. "That's your decision to earn back. This isn't a company to be acquired or a contract to be signed. This is a life. Our child will know who his father is. He will know the good, and he will know the bad. And it will be up to you and you alone to show him what kind of man you are going to be, not what kind of man you were." Just then Amelia drew a sharp breath, her hand flying to her belly. She looked at her doctor with wide eyes. I think it's time." The calm atmosphere of the room shattered. The doctor was instantly by her side. Elena was on the phone. And Julian stood there frozen as the climax of his downfall collided with the climax of Amelia's new beginning. He was about to become a father in the wreckage of his life, having just been handed the slimmest, most impossible chance at redemption by the very woman he had so utterly broken. He could not earn back her love, but she was giving him the chance to earn his son's. The final confrontation was over. The real work was about to begin. 2 years later, the world was different. In her Tribeca townhouse, bought with her own success, Amelia ran the thriving Archlight Fund with a quiet confidence that was respected throughout the financial world. The ashes of her old life had given way to a new dawn, one she had built herself. Her greatest accomplishment, however, was not her portfolio, but her son Leo, a bright-eyed toddler with his father's dark hair, who was currently building a wobbly tower of blocks on the living room floor. Julian Croft was no longer a king. Stripped of his empire and his pride, he had embarked on a quiet, painstaking path of redemption. His life was no longer about acquisitions and power plays. It was about consistency therapy and learning how to be a father. He and Amelia were not together that bridge had been permanently burned, but he was a fixed point in his son's life. As if on cue, the doorbell rang. It was 2:00 on Saturday. Amelia opened the door. Julian stood there, not as a tycoon in a bespoke suit, but as a father in jeans and a polo shirt. The haunted desperation that had once defined him was gone, replaced by a humble calm. Before a word was exchanged, a joyous shriek of "Dada" came from the living room. Leo toddled forward, his little arms outstretched. A smile of pure, unadorned love transformed Julian's face. He knelt, opening his arms, and scooped his son into a hug. It was the kind of hug Amelia had once so desperately craved, effortless, genuine, and full of an affection he was once incapable of giving. It was a simple gesture, yet it held the entire weight of his transformation. Watching them, Amelia felt a profound and lasting peace. The ghost of the woman who was shoved away had finally faded, replaced by the powerful creator of this new life. She had not sought reconciliation, but had offered the grace for him to change. Theirs was not a fairy tale of a couple reunited, but something more raw and real, a story of individual salvation. In losing everything he thought he wanted, Julian had finally learned how to give the one thing that mattered. The act of cruelty that had shattered their world had in the end created the space for them both to be saved. And so the empire of a millionaire, built on ambition and arrogance, crumbled with a single heartless shove. But from those ruins, something far more valuable grew. Amelia's journey teaches us that our lowest moments can become the bedrock for our greatest strengths. She didn't just survive. She thrived, building a life of purpose and power on her own terms. Julian's story is a stark reminder that regret is only the beginning. True redemption isn't found in grand apologies, but in the quiet, consistent, and humble work of becoming a better human being day by day. This wasn't a story about a marriage being saved, but about two individuals finding their true selves in the wreckage. What did you think of Amelia's ultimate decision? Let us know in the comments below.